The fog didn't just roll in that night, it crept as if it were alive. It swallowed the sea first, then the rocks, then the edges of the lighthouse itself. By the time Elias noticed, the world beyond his window had already vanished. He had tended the lighthouse for nearly 8 years without incident. Storms came and went, ships passed, and silence ruled everything in between. But this fog felt different, like something watching him from just beyond sight. The beam of the lighthouse cut through the mist, but the light seemed weaker. It stretched out and dissolved as if the fog refused to let it pass. Elias adjusted the controls twice, yet the darkness beyond only thickened. A low sound drifted upward from the cliffs below. At first he thought it was the ocean grinding against the rocks. Then it shifted, stretching into something that almost resembled a voice. Elias froze near the spiral staircase, listening carefully. The sound rose again, faint and broken, like words spoken underwater. He told himself it was wind forcing strange echoes through the stone. Still, the unease settled deep in his chest. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside, the cold air biting his skin instantly. The fog wrapped around him, damp and heavy, muting every familiar sound. The ocean was gone from sight, though he could hear it crashing somewhere below. Yet even that sound felt distant, as though it came from another place entirely. What remained close was the whisper, brushing against his ears like breath. He turned sharply, scanning the thick white emptiness. Nothing moved. Nothing shaped itself into form, yet the feeling of presence grew stronger. It was as if something stood just inches away, hidden perfectly by the mist. "Hello," Elias called, his voice trembling more than he expected. The word was swallowed instantly, devoured by the fog without an echo. Then, from somewhere behind him, the whisper returned, clearer this time. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It carried tone, rhythm, and something disturbingly human. Though he couldn't make out the exact words, he felt their meaning press against his mind. Elias stumbled back inside and slammed the heavy door shut. His heart pounded loudly in the tight walls of the lighthouse. For a long moment, he leaned against the door, listening for footsteps that never came. The silence returned, but it wasn't comforting anymore. It felt full, as though something had followed him in without needing to open the door. And somewhere deep within that silence, the whisper waited to be heard again. The whisper didn't fade with the night. It lingered. Elias heard it even after the fog thinned slightly at dawn. It clung to his thoughts like something unfinished. He tried to distract himself with routine tasks inside the lighthouse. Cleaning the lens, checking the fuel, adjusting the beam, all motions he had done 1,000 times. Yet every small sound made him turn his head too quickly. By evening, the fog returned thicker than before. It pressed against the windows like a living thing, dimming the light inside. Elias found himself staring at it for long stretches, waiting for movement that never fully came. The whisper returned just after midnight. This time it was closer, threading through the walls like a breath slipping through cracks. Elias felt it rather than heard it at first. He rushed to the storage room where an old recording device sat unused. It had been left behind by a previous keeper years ago. With shaking hands, he dusted it off and fumbled to get it working. The machine clicked to life with a low mechanical hum. Elias placed it near the base of the spiral stairs where the sound seemed strongest. The whisper grew louder, curling around the device as if aware of its purpose. He stepped back, holding his breath. The voice rose and fell in uneven waves, sometimes sharp, sometimes barely audible. It felt deliberate now, as though it wanted to be captured. Minutes passed like hours as the tape rolled. Elias resisted the urge to shut it off, even as dread pooled in his stomach. Something about the sound felt wrong, like it didn't belong in the world of the living. Finally, he stopped the recording. His fingers hovered over the playback switch for several seconds. A part of him didn't want to know what had been captured, but curiosity overpowered fear. He pressed the button and the tape began to spin again. At first there was only static, broken and uneven. Then the whisper emerged, clearer than before. Words began to form through the noise, stitched together with eerie precision. Elias leaned closer, his pulse hammering in his ears. "They will fall. The fire. The sky will burn." The voice rasped faintly. The tone was neither male nor female, but something hollow in between. Each word sounded dragged from a distant place. Elias stumbled back, knocking into the wall behind him. The recording continued, repeating fragments of the same warning, and as the final words played, a cold realization settled over him. This wasn't random noise. Something in the fog had spoken, and worse, it had chosen to be understood. Elias didn't sleep after hearing the recording. The words replayed in his mind with unnatural clarity, refusing to fade like ordinary memories. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the whisper again, sharper and closer. Morning came slowly, dragging pale light across the fog-covered sea. The mist still clung to the island, though thinner than before. Elias moved through the lighthouse like a ghost, restless and uneasy. He kept the recorder close, as if it were both proof and threat. Several times he considered throwing it into the ocean, yet something inside him insisted he needed it, that it mattered more than anything else. By midday, a supply boat radioed in with routine updates. Elias answered with forced calm, trying to sound normal. But then the voice on the other end mentioned breaking news from the mainland. A massive fire had erupted in a distant city overnight. Buildings collapsed, skies darkened with smoke, and casualties were rising. The description struck Elias like a physical blow. The words echoed too perfectly with what he had heard. Fire, falling, the sky burning. It was all there in the whisper. His grip tightened on the radio until his knuckles turned white. He asked for more details, his voice cracking slightly. The operator continued, unaware of the dread building inside Elias. Each new detail aligned with the fragmented warning from the tape. When the call ended, silence filled the lighthouse again. But it was no longer empty silence. It felt heavy with meaning. Elias slowly turned toward the recorder sitting on the table. His mind raced for logical explanations. Coincidence seemed impossible, yet the alternative was far worse. If the whisper had predicted this, what else could it know? The fog outside thickened again as evening approached. It rolled back over the island like a returning tide. Elias watched it gather, his chest tightening with anticipation. As darkness fell, the whisper returned once more. This time it didn't hesitate or hide in broken fragments. It spoke with clearer rhythm, as though it had learned how to reach him. Elias grabbed the recorder without thinking and switched it on. Fear twisted inside him, but it was mixed with something else now, an unbearable need to hear. He leaned closer as the voice slipped through the air. "As water rises, voices drown. The night will take them," it murmured. The words crawled into his ears, slow and deliberate. Elias felt his breath catch as he realized something chilling. This wasn't just happening again. The fog wasn't finished with him. It was only beginning. The whispers no longer waited for midnight. They came whenever the fog thickened, seeping into the lighthouse at all hours. Elias stopped trying to control when he listened, because the voices had already begun controlling him. Sleep became something distant and unreliable. When he did drift off, he dreamed in fragments of sound, not images. The same hollow voice echoed through his mind, repeating warnings he could never fully escape. He filled tape after tape, labeling them with trembling hands. Dates, times, fragments of phrases. His desk turned into a chaotic archive of dread. Each recording felt heavier than the last, as though it carried more than just sound. The predictions began coming faster. Fires, floods, accidents, disappearances, each whispered before it happened. And each time, the world beyond the island confirmed the horror with quiet indifference. Elias stopped using the radio unless absolutely necessary. Hearing confirmation of the tragedies made his chest tighten unbearably. It felt like he was listening to deaths he could have stopped, if only he understood sooner. The fog pressed closer to the lighthouse with each passing night. It no longer drifted, it surrounded. Sometimes Elias swore it pulsed gently, like something breathing just outside the walls. The voice changed too. It grew clearer, more deliberate, almost patient. Words formed faster now, sentences stretching longer, as if it was learning how to speak directly to him. "Closer now. You hear us. You will understand," it murmured through the recordings. Elias played those words again and again, unable to stop himself. They felt less like warnings and more like instructions. His reflection in the mirror began to look unfamiliar. Dark circles hollowed his eyes, and his skin seemed pale and stretched. He often caught himself staring too long, as if trying to confirm he was still real. Time blurred into a constant cycle of listening and waiting. Daylight offered no relief, only a quieter version of the same tension. The fog never fully lifted anymore. It lingered like a permanent presence. Elias started speaking back to the recordings. At first it was hesitant, just questions whispered into the empty room. But soon he found himself answering the voices as though they expected a response. One night, the whisper shifted in a way that made his blood run cold. It paused between words, leaving space for something else. And in that silence, Elias realized with growing horror that he had begun to fill it. The whisper changed the moment it said his name. It didn't echo or blur like the others. It spoke clearly, deliberately, as if it had always known him. Elias felt the sound settle deep inside his chest, heavier than any warning before. He froze beside the recorder, unable to move. His own name repeated again, softer this time, almost patient. It didn't sound threatening, which made it far worse. Elias rewound the tape with shaking hands. He needed to hear it again, to make sure his mind hadn't twisted the sound into something familiar. But the playback confirmed it without mercy. "Elias, you remember," the voice whispered. The tone carried something strange, almost intimate. It felt like recognition, like something that had been waiting for him specifically. Memories he hadn't thought about in years began to surface. His childhood near the coast, nights spent staring into the fog with a quiet sense of wonder. Back then, he had believed the mist held secrets. The whispers grew stronger as those memories returned. They no longer spoke of distant tragedies alone. Now they pulled fragments from his past, shaping them into something darker. "Sound sure? The night you listened, you heard us first," the voice continued. Elias's breath caught as a faint memory sharpened. A night long ago when he thought he heard voices in the fog and ignored them. He stumbled back, knocking over a stack of tapes. The room filled with scattered recordings, each one holding pieces of something he didn't fully understand. It felt like the lighthouse itself was closing in on him. The fog outside thickened into an impenetrable wall. Light from the beacon barely escaped anymore. It reflected back into the glass, trapping him inside his own glow. Elias tried to reach the radio, desperate to contact someone, anyone, but static filled the channel, drowning out every attempt. Beneath the static he could hear it again, faint but unmistakable. The whisper had found its way into the signal. It no longer needed the fog alone. It followed him through wires, through walls, through every space he occupied. "You stayed. You kept listening. Now you belong," it murmured. The words sank into him with terrifying certainty. This was no longer about warning the world. The realization struck like a final crack in his sanity. The voices weren't predicting disasters. They were leading him toward one. And for the first time, Elias understood that the final tragedy wasn't somewhere far away. It was waiting for him, right here in the lighthouse. The fog swallowed the lighthouse completely before dawn. It pressed against every window, every crack, every seam in the stone. Elias could no longer tell where the outside ended and the inside began. The whispers filled the air without pause. They no longer needed darkness or silence to exist. They spoke freely now, overlapping and weaving together into something almost like a chorus. Elias sat in the center of the room, surrounded by tapes. His hands trembled, but his expression had gone strangely calm. It was the kind of calm that came after fear had nowhere left to go. He reached for the recorder one last time. The device felt heavier than ever, as if it carried all the voices inside it already. Still, he pressed the button and let it begin. "This is Elias, lighthouse keeper," he said, his voice uneven. Each word felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. "If anyone hears this, listen carefully." The whispers softened as if giving him space. For the first time, they didn't interrupt. It felt intentional, like they wanted his message to be heard. "They're real," Elias continued, forcing the words out. "The fog, it speaks, and it knows things before they happen." His breath shook as he struggled to remain focused. Behind him, the fog began to slip through the edges of the door. Thin strands curled along the floor like pale fingers. Elias didn't turn to look, but he felt it coming closer. "I thought they were warnings," he said, "but they're not. There's something else." The recorder clicked softly as the tape continued to spin. The whispers rose again, but now they blended with his voice. Their tone matched his rhythm, echoing each word seconds after he spoke it. It was no longer separate. It was becoming part of him. "They don't just predict," Elias whispered. "They choose. They guide." His voice faltered as something cold brushed against his arm. The fog reached him fully then. It wrapped around his body without resistance, slipping through his clothes and against his skin. Elias gasped, but the sound dissolved into the air. "You hear them because they want you to," he said weakly. "And once you do, they don't let go." The recorder captured every trembling word, every fractured breath. The whispers grew louder, no longer hiding their presence. They spoke over him, through him, around him. Elias's final words broke apart as his voice merged with theirs. Then silence. Days later, a passing ship reported the lighthouse had gone dark. When a crew arrived, they found the door slightly open and the interior abandoned. Only the recorder remained, still resting where Elias had left it. When they played the tape, his voice began clearly. But as it continued, something else joined in, soft, layered, and unmistakably alive. And beneath it all, a final whisper emerged, directed at whoever was listening. "You hear us now.